Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, corruption abounds in school systems all across Kentucky. We'll dig into a couple of stories surrounding this idea. We see time and time again liberal cities just yelling at private companies while not asking themselves what are they doing wrong to make businesses have to adjust so much of how they act in these cities, or either just leave them completely because they can no longer do business there. Then finally, I'll dig into the debate a bit. Obviously, a lot of people on the national level talking about the debate. We'll be taking a look at that. Hopefully, I'll give you a little bit different outtakes that you probably won't hear on most shows, just to kind of point out some inside baseball politics of what's going on here. And we do see now Beshear getting even more mentions in the Twitterverse as a potential swap for Biden. We'll go into whether or not they can swap Biden and whether or not Beshear would be a good choice. But before I dig down into it, I got a couple of things I need to say. The last couple of days have been a little bit odd. Obviously, yesterday we didn't do a show. I apologize for that. We had a lot going on. Obviously, with the debate that evening too as well, it's harder to record the show and then get it out at the same time as preparing for the debate and kind of getting some things together in order to put together content on that. Because obviously I do content outside of just this podcast. I do some things on Twitter and those kinds of things that take some time out. But also, the show's going through a little bit of a shift. I'm hoping to announce next week what this shift is, as it's moving onto a bit bigger of a stage. Don't worry, for you podcast listeners, it still means you'll get content each and every day. Sorry I took the day off yesterday, but it's not going to change much of your listening experience. But if you noticed, the day before yesterday wasn't really formatted like a radio show, and then today's isn't either. It's because, well, we have some things going on, a little bit of shifts, but hopefully, like I said, next week we'll be able to announce it. It's a big deal, and hopefully we can push that out there to you. And before I dig into the stories, I want to take a moment to wish my greatest condolences to Congressman Thomas Massie. His wife, unfortunately, passed away. He announced this on social media. This is just awful, awful news. I'd met her a few times. My wife has obviously met her a few times. She was a wonderful, fantastic woman, very supportive, really, especially for Congress, a fantastic politician's spouse, I would say. I mean, you typically see a lot of these politicians get divorces and faithfulness going on. I mean, just in Frankfurt, we've seen several divorces this year, reportedly surrounding unfaithfulness within marriages, with, you know, messing around with colleagues and lobbyists and everything else. And it's hard sometimes on the spouses to be able to go through the political life. And whenever you see a spouse that's involved, you know that is, one, a fantastic candidate, but also that means their support system will help keep them on the straight and narrow. When you see them not as there as often, it can kind of sometimes contribute to people thinking that the spouse isn't as supportive, and there's also not somebody at home helping keep that politician on the straight and staying so dedicated to their principles. And the fact that Thomas Massie's wife was very involved as far as going with him to events and going with him when she could. I mean, obviously they had kids and have kids at home and things, so that limits, you know, like any family, that would limit what you could do. But the fact that when she could, she did get involved. She's at his election night parties, those kinds of things. That points to a spouse that was very supportive, and also points to a spouse that really, when you're seeing Thomas Massie and his successes and the fact that he's able to stay strong to his principles, a lot of that has to do with a really strong spouse behind them that gets it, supports them, you know, agrees with those principles, and is helping keep them in line. And so absolutely devastating loss, obviously, to the Massie family, and hope they wish them prayers in this time. Very struggling time, I know. I hope Massie takes a few days off here. And obviously, I just want to say, fantastic woman. His wife's a fantastic woman. But moving on from that now, unfortunate note, On last episode, I talked about Fayette County Public Schools a little bit and some issues going on there, touched on some issues in Louisville. And after I got done recording that show, somebody had sent me a clip from, not a clip, just sent me the podcast for the Tom Dupree show where they were talking about something pretty important that I want to mention to kind of set up what they're talking about here. The Fayette County Public School, and this matters to the entire state because this is some pretty big corruption, but this is the kind of thing that happens in all these districts, right? So the Fayette County Public Schools purchased a historic property at the corner of Mason, Headley, and Versailles Road in Lexington. Just for those who want to know where that is, that's a historic property. Now, I want to pause here because I posted about this online, and a lot of people are talking about, started taking some of this conversation and be about historic properties. And while that's not as much what the story's about, I mean, to a degree, it's about them raising a beautiful historic property that they really didn't need to. But it's also worth notating when it comes to historic properties, just my personal opinion on this, there are historic properties that I think are very important for us to preserve. You know, historic properties where important people in history lived, important people built, properties that are historically valuable to things like, the history of the area, the founders, one of the first big buildings in an area, maybe the first home to have electricity in the state or something like that. I think those are historically valuable, don't get me wrong. But a lot of times we see some weaponization of the historic properties marker on properties that aren't particularly important. They're just old. And I think that gets a little zealous sometimes. It can get overzealous too and not allowing updates within the buildings like new windows and those things to make them, work better with modern technologies and have that modern touch. And so I just wanted to notate that's kind of my personal opinion on historic properties right now, is that I think preserving the historic properties we need to preserve is a fantastic idea that are very important. Slapping a historic property label on everything that's just happens to be older than a certain year, I think isn't always very necessary and is... I don't even see the cultural value of that specifically. Obviously, if there's a zoning regulation within a neighborhood where they're like, hey, we want to keep this historic property look, that makes some sense to me, and you're opting into that when you buy the neighborhood. But just to have some random historic properties preservation group come by and slap a historic label on a building or a house just because it's old, and now you have all these restrictions, I'm a little iffier on that. But anyways, putting that to the side. So the Fayette County Public Schools buys this historic property. Now, the state Kentucky Department of Education came in and did some surveys on this, and 3 separate surveys have been done, and all of them said that building, the historic property building, was very sound, could be used for the plan of what they were going to do. They could keep a lot of that property together and still do what they wanted to do with the lot. But instead, the Fayette County School Board decided they're going to go ahead and just tear the whole thing down. And so that's just kind of to set the stage. Now, I want to go over to the Tom Dupree show where they talk about something. Tom Dupree here is talking about how he is looking at building a cabin down in Rockcastle County, and he goes to a guy to get materials that scraps homes and does scrapping and gets old materials out of buildings and resells them, and is a contractor, and they had a experience they worked on and working on this property that's being raised, and they told him something. Let's take a listen to what Tom Dupree says the guy told him. Listen.
We were told that one of the school board members actually came in and personally took the cabinets in the kitchen home.
No, they removed the whole kitchen and took it and installed it in their personal home.
In their home. So one of the school board members went to something that was, that the school board had bought and took the stuff.
The taxpayers bought it.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what they're talking about there is that they bought the historic home raised, and then apparently in the destruction process, a Fayette County School Board member came in and just took the historic, nicely done kitchen and took out the cabinets and took out the countertops and took out the faucets and the sinks and all these things, and then took it just to their house to install into their kitchen. So they just got a new kitchen out of the deal. Now, of course, this, if true, is incredibly illegal. The way this should be handled when you have a situation like this and you want to get rid of these items, you auction them off. It would be like the school can't just like give a car to a school board owner to own, or even a teacher, like, here's a free car from the school. No. It's not tied to your employment. It's not a part of your compensation. It's not like a lease, and then you have to pay taxes on that like it's compensation. No, we're just going to give you a car to like own forever, regardless of if you're here or not. That's illegal, right? The way this has to be done, when the schools or any government entity has property that they're trying to get rid of, it needs to be auctioned off first. I've heard of things like this happening before. Obviously, when I was running for state treasurer, I heard a story about how when the state treasurer's office was auctioning off some of the stuff that just sat in their vaults for years and years and years that nobody had claimed, and they couldn't find anybody who owned it. So they just had like lost property that was, valuable items. And before it went on sale for a bid out for auctioning, that the state workers and especially the treasurer's office got the opportunity to come in and buy what they wanted to first before it was offered for public sale. Those kinds of things are bad enough, but in this situation, it wasn't even, here's your first shot at buying something before it goes on public sale. What they're alleging here is that they literally just took it, didn't pay for it, didn't count as compensation, and it was never offered up for auction to the public. Just absolutely awful. And another point they make during the show, and I agree with, is like, where is the news reporting on these things? Apparently they say they're aware of it. Obviously they're aware of it with now this podcast going on. You would hope to see that they go ahead and investigate and find out what's going on here. But of course that would involve investigating some people that maybe they like, and it doesn't fall in line, and they think, this is really a non-story. So you hope to see that they go ahead and investigate on it, and you hope that it would make a difference. But honestly, at this point, I think a lot of us are just like, it's kind of to be expected. This is just what government does. This is just what these elected people do. They're corrupt and awful. And it's just, we have such a low opinion now of what our politicians, the standards we hold them to, because it's just eroded over time. We're like, yeah, that's what they do. Corrupt government going to corrupt. That's to be expected. Well, moving on, speaking of corrupt school boards, just to kind of tie this in here, we've got the Jefferson County public school system. This story is like a month old, but just to kind of show that this is not just a Fayette County school problem. This is a statewide problem. Sarah McIntosh, one of the school board members of Jefferson County Public Schools, apparently hasn't fulfilled her in-service training courses that school board members are supposed to take for 2023. This here from Wave 3 News. The courses amounting to 12 hours of training had a deadline of December 31st, 2023, according to the Kentucky School Board Association. As of last Thursday, this was wrote on May 22nd, just so you know. As of last Thursday, McIntosh had logged 0 hours, record showed, and all other school board members had completed their assignments. The in-service training courses included 3 hours of finances, 1 hour of ethics training, and 1 hour of superintendent evaluation training, among other courses. And so it's no wonder that Fayette County Public Schools is being run so horribly as far as financially goes. They can't manage their money because, well, their school board members are just not attending trainings about how to manage money. And of course, it's no surprise that they're having secret, potentially illegal, state law violating meetings, which they're doing often, to hide away from the public when they're not attending their ethics trainings that are required. And then also the 1 hour superintendent evaluation. Objectively speaking, Jefferson County Public Schools is getting worse. Objectively speaking, their busing system, worse. Their results, worse. Their school behavior, worse. Their school attendance, worse. Everything that you can measure a metric on for Louisville schools, for Jefferson County Public Schools, is worse. And yet, despite that, the school board gave a gigantic increase and raise to their superintendent, leaving a lot of us scratching our heads wondering, what did he do to deserve this money? Well, apparently, if you're not attending your superintendent evaluation trainings, well, maybe you think he did a good job because you don't know how to evaluate the people who you're supposed to be in charge of. Now, what will happen because she didn't comply? Well, they don't know. They reported it to the Attorney General's office. They asked the Attorney General's office, what are you going to do about it? So far, the Attorney General has not responded to Wave 3. They say that if he does respond, they'll update us. And this was about a month ago, so they didn't respond. And I would say that it's because, I don't know, maybe they can't do anything about it. And this falls into our legislature. If our legislature isn't going to start holding individual elected people accountable, we see the legislature coming in, and right now they're having committee hearings about breaking up JCPS into different districts, so that way you can have a little bit more of a autonomy for each area, so that way areas aren't being drugged down by the school district's decision making because they can't do it well. Or, you know, you have people talking about obviously school choice to help solve this, or at least interdistrict choice. You have people talking about, of course, the busing, and all these issues go on and on. But at the end of the day, if we don't have a legislature, understand the way our legislature can deal with this is through impeachment. Our legislature can impeach anybody in the state other than a fellow legislature. They can remove them for office, and they don't even have to specify exactly why. The way the laws are wrote, they could impeach somebody because they don't like the way they sneeze. That's the way it's wrote. It's not that they have to commit high crimes or misdemeanors. And if we're going to sit here and say, look, you didn't complete your proper training to be a school board member, you're cut. We're impeaching you. If you can't say, look, your school district has been failing, instead of talking about breaking it up or spending more money or, well, what do we need to do here? Impeach some people. Same thing with judges. They're passing more and more laws trying to get judges to follow it, minimum sentencing guidelines and everything else, but they're taking away discretion in the process from good judges that could show good discretion, increasing tyranny on all of us because they won't remove judges who won't do their jobs. This is why you were given the power of impeachment, to remove people who don't do their jobs. Yet our legislature, they sit on their hands. Oh yeah, we can't do anything about it. Trying to sell us on that. They obviously can. Here's another interesting story that I saw that I wanted to mention just because it points to some issues just in the thought process of government in general when it comes to private companies. This out of Louisville, WDRB. 2 Louisville Metro Council members are trying to get to the bottom as to why the Kroger store on West Broadway is closing early. As one of the only 2 grocery stores in the West End, the early closing makes a community known as a food desert more dry. Kroger spokesperson Jessica Sharp said in an email that the store on West Broadway is open from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day, but people told WDRB it's not the case. For Miss Caldwell, who lives just a few blocks down from Kroger store and doesn't have a car, she walks to the store when she needs something, which is every day. Caldwell said the erratic closing hours began a couple of months ago, and on a Monday, she's leaving nothing to chance and did her shopping in the middle of the afternoon. If the store closes early, Caldwell said she just waits until the next day to do her shopping. Doing regular business hours, WDRB watched 2 girls that apparently had to walk to the grocery store take the shopping cart home with them. People go to walk to this grocery store. People don't have no money. I'm quoting now, so don't blame me for the grammar here. People got to walk to this grocery store. People don't have no money to Uber Eat and all that fancy stuff, said Antoine, I believe it's Antoine Jones, as he sat on a bright blue bicycle that he rides to the grocery store. Jones came to the store when needed, and he said there have been times where his needs were not met. Where can you go? Jones asked, knowing the closest grocery store several miles away. Metro Council members Hawkins and Arthur are planning a rally in the Kroger parking lot at 2 p.m. Wednesday, a statement from their office read. So basically, they claim that this grocery store is having erratic hours. It's closing at odd and erratic times. And so rather than, I don't know, one, they don't really cite the early hours. They don't have a source to say when the early hours close exactly. But the other thing that they don't do here is talk about, like, is it a staffing issue that can't get staff to work and work those closing hours? Is it a crime issue? Is there too much stealing? Is there too much theft? Is those part of the issues going on with this? No, instead they say, you know, it's Kroger's fault. We're going to blame Kroger. In fact, we're going to blame Kroger so much that we're going to have a rally at Kroger. Now, this takes a twist because this story, the story I read to you initially came out 2 days ago. This story came out yesterday, updated today, where the Kroger responds and says, you know what, we're sorry. Our hours have been a little off. We'll stay till 9 p.m. But if you want us to stay, people need to stop stealing. The data, the loss prevention data is out of the roof. This is what the councilwoman's saying. Because Kroger basically told her, like, yeah, you want to ask why we're closing early? Well, it's because people are stealing from us and loss prevention. And so we're trying to limit our hours to kind of push people out. They didn't say exactly that's why. Because they know if they said that, look, we're closing early because people can't stop stealing in the district, that all the activists out there will be like, oh, that's racism. You're just blaming black people. So they said, hey, look, you need to stop stealing. But what's funny, though, so they reach out. So the councilwoman says, hey, stop stealing. Stop stealing from this Kroger. They're going to leave. They're going to do everything else. Well, and then apparently, this still from WDRB, they interviewed a guy, just a neighborhood guy, about the store. And this is what he said, okay? He said, it's the worst Kroger, said neighbor Kelvin Alcon. They don't clean, they don't care. Alcon said the store seems understaffed and that people steal because either no one is watching or they get tired of waiting for a register to open up, which he said is normal. So basically, so the councilwoman says, hey, don't steal from the store. And then the people of the neighborhood are like, well, we're stealing because we can. like he's not like saying people aren't stealing because nobody's watching them. Okay, if you're stealing because nobody's watching you, you're a bad person. All right? You shouldn't do something wrong because you can get away with it. That's a character problem. And then they go on to say, well, you know, and also there's nobody to check us out, so we just leave. We all know that these Kroger stores have self-checkouts. And if you're just going to leave because you have to wait in line, but you can't, you still want your stuff. So you don't want to wait in line for your stuff, but you're just going to leave with it. That's also a character flaw. So rather than recognizing that this Kroger is, they didn't come out and say it, but they mentioned it in their letter, so I'm going to assume that this Kroger closes at 9 p.m., which is at least an hour to two earlier than all the other Krogers in Louisville, they say. That their hours are erratic because they have a hard time staffing. They can't keep the place clean, apparently. This is the claim. And it seems understaffed. And then they're sitting there saying that, well, you know, we're going to steal from them anyways, though. And they wonder why nobody cares and nobody wants to work at the store. Because all they do, apparently all the neighborhood does, is steal from them. And when the Kroger leaves, they're going to be crying and talking about how racist and mean Kroger is. Meanwhile, Kroger's just trying to make a profit. They're not a charity. They did the same thing when Thornton's left. They cried downtown gas station. They cried about, oh, this is the last gas station left this crime-ridden neighborhood. How horrible and racist of the store. They say they cannot acknowledge. Instead of browbeating the company, and instead of saying, well, it's their fault, they're not watching us, so we're just going to steal. Instead of that, if you want nice things, you need to take care of what you have. If you want nice things, you need to act in a way that wants to bring companies into an area. And on the governmental side of things, instead of holding rallies in a Kroger in an attempt to pressure Kroger to bend to your will and to get upset at a private company for literally just doing business, perhaps you should try to, I don't know, deal with the problems that is making them leave because you're not enforcing the law and you've got a culture problem. And instead of dealing with that, something that you would say government and community leaders can a lot more deal with, you'd rather just yell at a private company because that's a simpler fix. And you wonder why people are leaving. So the debate happened yesterday, and hopefully some of you all tuned into it for as long as you could. It's interesting. I watched it with a few friends. A few friends got together, a few wives gathered together. And it was interesting hearing, the men that were watching it are a little more tuned into politics, I would say, out of that group of people. But it was interesting watching the wives' reactions to it. Obviously the wives in this case, my wife and my friends' wives, they are married to men who are a little more politically involved, politically knowledgeable, follow politics, and they follow politics themselves as much as they can kind of through secondary information. Their husbands are either talking to them about it or they're just seeing the news stories because their husbands talk about it. Some of them listen occasionally to like my show or a few other podcasts, but they're not really as tuned in as I'd say the men in the room. So it was interesting hearing their reactions throughout of watching Biden, because they pretty much tuned out after the first few minutes because they had no idea what Biden was saying. And it was very true that this debate went awful for Biden. It was, when he answered, it was almost like I described it as he was kind of talking to people assuming they had a lot of background information. He wasn't cognitively there enough to realize that these people had no idea what he's saying. There's this one moment where he's talking about fentanyl machines at the border. And I believe he was talking about fentanyl detecting machines, but he kept talking about these fentanyl machines. And my wife's sitting there what is he saying? I have no idea. What are these machines? Because that's not a commonplace information. Anytime you're a politician and you're politicking or you're debating or you're trying to communicate to the public, you have to be sure you're not using terminology and talking about things that they don't have a lot of background knowledge in, that isn't common understanding. We run into this problem, for example, on this show when I talk about certificate of need laws so often. We feel a need to kind of give you a quick foreman on what certificate of need is so people can understand before we can even begin to talk about the many, many issues with it. And if you just jump into it, people would struggle. And so in a 2-minute debate, if something like certificate of need comes up, unless the moderator really frames it in, you better keep it pretty surface level and explain what it is quickly and keep it very surface level and not try to get into the nitty gritty. And I think Biden was trying to get into the nitty gritty without a lot of background information and without complete thoughts, because obviously he's mentally not there. And I think that's a lot of why the people who were not as politically involved struggled. I think as well, people who are a little more politically involved, we knew what he was trying to say, what Biden was trying to say, so we could pick apart more things of what he said. But I think people who are not as politically involved have no idea what Biden was even trying to get across. And I think in turn, they would struggle a fair amount understanding the debate. And I think that's really why Biden had a rough time. I think. I mean, he had a rough time. That's just plain straight. He had a rough time. But putting that to the side here, we'll kind of dig into the media's reaction to it. And as such, I want to dig into some different parts of the debate that I don't think you're going to hear everywhere else. Because obviously every political commentary place is going to be talking about that debate. They're going to be talking about what happened on the debate. They're going to be giving you takes about it. And so I want to try to keep the show, one, Kentucky specific, but two, I also, anytime I am talking about national issues, I want to make sure I have something to say that I don't think you're going to get everywhere else. And so something I want to hit upon here, off the debate, that I think was important is that they brought up abortion as the second issue. I believe they're about 15 minutes into the debate and abortion came up. And it's interesting that they would claim this as this big issue. And I think this is where you can see a CNN liberal bent, because the liberal media really, 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 really wants the public to care about abortion. They really do, because it's the only issue where they feel that Democrats have a leg up on Republicans, because they can paint Republicans as this ultra ban on abortion extremists that don't want abortion in case of life of the mother, which isn't true. Or they'll say well, what about rape or incest? And of course, that's a bigger debate than we can have here about what life means to you and why rape and incest exceptions kind of give away the entire belief that, a kid in the womb is actually a kid in the womb, is a life, and not just something to be thrown away. And so that's something to dig into and have a conversation about. But putting that to the side, the Democrats feel like they can paint Republicans as extreme on it. With Roe v. Wade overturning, they believed it brought it into the public view. But they're simply wrong. I mean, poll after poll after poll shows that while the general public may agree with a abortion rules and laws that have some sort of limitations, after viability, no, before viability, maybe yes, and exemptions for rape or incest, that may be kind of what the public wants. It's not really an important issue to the public. Now, the fact that that's what the public views as okay does not mean that politicians should shape their belief system around that. That would be the incorrect move here. What it means is that there hasn't been enough messaging from the pro-life side to help shape that public viewpoint. And really, we haven't gotten to the argument of what is life? Where does life start? Because that's the real argument we need to have. And that's what really we need to be convincing people on. But instead, we're getting to the, off in the weeds on things like exemptions and everything else. But the real question is, does a child in the womb have the same value as a born child? And if you do not believe so, why do you not believe so? We believe yes. Here's why. Why do you believe not? And then once you have that discussion, the whole entire conversation about exemptions and life of the mother and things, you can have that conversation in that framework once we all agree on that. But if we don't first agree on when life even has value, we can't even have that debate. But like I said, putting all that to the side, the Democrats, the liberal media, they want you to care. But poll after poll after poll says that to the average person, they really don't care about that much right now. In fact, recent Gallup polls show that when asked about your top 3 issues out of like 9 or 10, they gave them like a list of 10 issues and were asked to pick their top 3 issues. And abortion was one of those issues. Out of those 10 issues they had to choose from, only 20% even put it in their top 3. So only 20% said this is anywhere on the radar where something I really, really care about. And that lines up and that makes sense. Because unless you're a single woman who really wants to get abortions, or you're a liberal woman who thinks that abortion's really important to you, the abortion issue just isn't high on the list. It just isn't something yes, maybe you disagree with the ultra conservative, as the left would call it, standpoint on this, but you really don't care. Because it really doesn't actually affect your life. So Democrats want it to affect your life. They keep talking about it because they're trying to convince you to care. Most people really don't care. So putting to the side the fact that the liberal media is trying to make you care, but people really don't. Putting aside the fact that this was like the second, third question asked 15 minutes in, and it really isn't that important to what's actually affecting everyday Americans. They're not sitting around concerned about abortion. Maybe extreme liberals are, but they're sitting around concerned about things like the economy and illegal immigration and how they're going to make it day by day. How will they buy a house? How will they continue to afford food for their family? Like, that's what people are worried about right now. They're not worried about murdering babies. But anyways, despite that, I did want to share with you a clip on it. This is like an interesting kind of Democrat talking point. And I don't think they realize how much of what they're saying contradicts, but we hear this time and time again. We're hearing this from politicians, Democrats running for office here locally in Kentucky. And then we're also hearing this, of course, on the national level. Let's take a listen to this here.
I'll let you do that. This is the same topic. 7 states have no legal restrictions on how far into a pregnancy a woman can obtain an abortion. Do you support any legal limits on how late a woman should be able to terminate a pregnancy?
I supported Roe v. Wade, which had 3 trimesters. The first time is between the woman and the doctor. Second time is between the doctor and an extreme situation. The third time is between the doctor, between the woman and the state. The idea that the politicians that the founders wanted the politicians to be the ones making decisions about a woman's health is ridiculous. That's the last. No politician should be making that decision. A doctor should be making those decisions.
So this is like a common talk. So they'll say, we report returning Roe v. Wade. That's all we support. And Roe v. Wade didn't exactly on its own prescribe things like trimesters and Biden tried to describe it. And like I said, it's always hard to understand what he's saying in these cases, but he basically is trying to describe that during the first trimester, no restrictions. During the second trimester, exemptions, and third trimester, no. I think that's what he's trying to. I don't know exactly, so I'm not trying to put words in his mouth. Like this is the thing about his debate performance. It's hard to figure out what he was trying to say all the time. But I'm going to assume that's what he's trying to say because we've heard that from local politicians. For an example, something I talked about on the show, you had Adam Moore running in the 45th House District against Thomas Jefferson in the Lexington-Jessamine area. And he brought up this talking point of saying, abortion should be between a woman and her doctor, or a birthing person and her doctor, and shouldn't be between the politicians, shouldn't get to weigh in on it. But then when challenged and saying, okay, so you believe in an abortion up until birth. You don't believe there should be any restrictions on abortion. You believe that you should be able to murder the baby the second before it comes out of the womb. They say, well, no, that's not what I said. In fact, in this same debate, Trump did that to Biden. He brought up what he just said was abortion up until birth. And he was like, no, that's not what I said. But you can't say that the state can outlaw abortions at any point while also saying that abortion shouldn't be up to politicians. It takes politicians to pass laws to set restrictions on abortions. So if you can't hold the two. You can't have the two beliefs. I think we should basically, that should be basic understanding, that those two ideas conflict. But despite the fact that this obvious confliction, that politicians make laws, therefore, you cannot have a law restricting abortion if you do not believe in politicians getting a say on it. That means you're for abortion up until birth. That's what they actually believe, but they can't say that because they know it's extreme. And they know that the average person, if to choose between no abortions or you can murder a baby the second before it's born, most people would say, let's just not have abortions in. If we had to give it up for that, then let's just not have abortions. I don't want to murder babies. And they have to say this completely conflicting belief, and it absolutely makes no sense. So I did want to hit upon that, but the other thing I want to hit upon is that, throughout the debate, it's obvious that Biden and his team are living in a completely different world. And no matter who ends up running, if they can't acknowledge that people are not better off, they will lose. This is something throughout the entire debate, and then we've actually seen from the media as well, trying to convince people they're better off. There's several times during the debate where Biden tried to claim that immigration is better under him than under Trump. That the economy was better under him than Trump. That people are better off under him than Trump. But it's just factually not true. And if you can't address that and accept that, well, you're not going to win this election. You can't make good arguments back to Trump in the first place. Because it's not true. Now, of course, we'll see the media trying to cover this in. I've seen media trying to say that, well, actually, GDP growth was better under Biden than Trump. Therefore, Biden has a better economy. We've seen those kinds of fact checks going on. Because, of course, Biden did such a bad job. People are trying to claim, well, Trump said a lot of false things, but Biden couldn't combat him. So now they're going to try to fact check him afterwards. And their fact checks are absolutely awful. We'll go into what the media is kind of saying as far as their fact checks go, just about the debate completely. But one of them was on this claim of a better economy under Trump or Biden, and they tried to claim that GDP was the thing. But here's the problem with that claim. Inflation will cause greater GDP growth. If everything costs more, the money being spent on things will be higher, period. You can't look at GDP growth under Biden and say, well, it's been better than Trump, without first at least taking into account inflation to get an honest look at that. And also, it really doesn't matter. It matters what the voter is experiencing. And if you cannot accept the fact that the voter is experiencing a very difficult life right now when compared to under Trump, that they are experiencing an inability to afford homes. They're experiencing being locked in to situations like living with their parents or renting when they would rather buy because they can't find a home that they can afford anymore because it just isn't there. That gas is higher, that food costs more. If you can't acknowledge that, well, you can't fix it, but also you're not going to win people over to your side. What's interesting, though, about not acknowledging it is I believe the Biden team and Biden live in a completely different world. I believe they do. Because the way he was handling himself, I think he really believed that. I think he really believed that his economy is better. I think he really believes that he's handling immigration better. And they're in a completely different world. And I point out how the media is responding. One, media is throwing Biden completely under the bus right now. They acknowledge he did a bad job. We'll go into that. But while they're still going to try to say Trump did horrible and they're going to create these talking points against Trump because they got to shift it, especially as they realize that Biden's probably not going away. We'll, like I said, get into that conversation in a second. They're going to try to salvage it somewhat for Biden, so they're going to talk about Trump a little bit more. And as they dig into Trump, we're going to start seeing some pretty extreme things from the media in order to make up for the Biden situation. I want to quote something from The Guardian, okay, as a perfect example of the media really trying to twist things. So this here from The Guardian: Biden defended Roe and legal abortion, and Trump responded by drawing the debate into a discussion of illegal immigration. So that's a quote from The Guardian newspaper, well, news website. That's a quote from The Guardian trying to say that Trump, when asked about abortion, Trump decided to make the conversation about illegal immigration. You'll actually hear this from the media a lot, that, well, Trump kept bringing up things that didn't have to do with it. He wouldn't answer questions. And it's interesting they claim that when, like I said, I was watching this debate with some men, friends, and wives, and just family friends, and the wives actually mentioned that, wow, Trump's actually being really straightforward in answering questions. That's not something we typically see from politicians. But then the media, the way they're writing it, they're saying, oh, no, Trump changed he didn't answer, and he didn't give specific, and he tried to avoid the questions. But remember that Guardian quote that Biden said he would put in place Roe v. Wade, and Trump decided to make it about illegal immigration. Let's listen to the actual exchange here. This is just a few minutes long, a minute or two long. Let's listen to the actual exchange that led to Trump talking about illegal immigration on the abortion issue here now.
Thank you. President Biden?
It's been a terrible thing, what you've done. The fact is that the vast majority of constitutional scholars supported Roe when it was decided. Supported Roe. And that's this idea that they're all against it is just ridiculous. And this is the guy who says the state should be able to have it. We're in a state where in 6 weeks, you don't even know whether you're pregnant or not, but you cannot see a doctor and have him decide on what your circumstances are, whether you need help. The idea that states are able to do this is a little like saying we're going to turn civil rights back to the states, let each state have a different rule. Look, there's so many young women who have been, including a young woman who just was murdered, and he went to the funeral. The idea that she was murdered by an immigrant coming in, they talk about that. But here's the deal. There's a lot of young women are being raped by their in-laws, by their spouses, brothers and sisters, it's just ridiculous. And they can do nothing about it. And they try to arrest them when they cross state lines.
Thank you.
There have been many young women murdered by the same people he allows to come across our border. We have a border that's the most dangerous place anywhere in the world, considered the most dangerous place anywhere in the world.
So who brought up illegal immigration? Was it Trump or was it Biden? You heard that exchange is about abortion. Trump had not brought up illegal immigration. But now Biden brought it up. What he was trying to say, I believe, was that Trump's out here attending these women killed by illegal immigrants and everything else, but he doesn't actually care about women, because if he did, he'd talk about abortion. But you can't actually tell what Joe Biden was trying to say, but you did hear him talking about Trump attending funerals for people killed by illegal immigrants. And so Trump responds by talking about illegal immigration. Now, the way The Guardian wrote it, Trump came out left field talking about illegal immigration. But that's not what happened. Biden talked about illegal immigration. Trump just responded. Now, of course, though, talking about the media is really throwing Biden under the bus after yesterday's debate performance. And immediately afterwards, seeing CNN's panel talking about how Democrats are in tailspin, he did awful and everything else, super interesting because Biden's performance at the debate is pretty standard Biden. I mean, he didn't actually make the gigantic, horrible gaffes that some of the worst gaffes he's ever made, but he just did normal Biden. He was unintelligent. He paused for long periods of time. You had no idea what he was saying. He was mush-mouth mumbling. These are things we've been seeing for years now. So either A, the media realized that, well, we can't spin this, and they really believed that all these videos and things of seeing Biden just completely all over the place, having senior moments, not with it in his mind, have all been made up or blown out of proportion. That's a common claim we hear, argument we hear from them. But if that's not the case, though, they really don't, I think, know and understand that hasn't been the situation. That instead what's really been happening here is that all the conservative talking points, fake videos have been real. Do you think that's what's going on? That they just suddenly realize, like, oh yeah, he actually is bad off. We've been believing our own reporting that he's okay? I don't think so. I think the call went out. Like, we need to throw him under the bus. We can't spin this anymore. It's clear he's not with it. He did such a bad job. This is after we juiced him up. This was after weeks of prep. This was after we put him on more drugs than a racehorse, and he still can't hold it together. He's not going to be able to hold this together for the campaign. He's going to lose. We need to remove him. But they have a problem. Getting somebody to not run again will be very, it's almost impossible. And here's why. One, the people in their ear, their ecosystem around them, depend on them being in office. So they're going to be in his ear saying, no, keep running. Chief of staffs, cabinet members, literally his advisors, they all only have jobs because Biden's in office. And if Biden leaves office, they won't have jobs anymore. There's no guarantee that some other Democrat, maybe that would win against Trump, would then come in and rehire them. So they're dependent upon Biden to stay in office, so they need him to be there. His wife, she can't be first lady if somebody else is in office. So she's going to pressure him to stay there. Everybody's going to tell him. His vice president even, Kamala Harris. Unless she's the one being picked to run instead of him, she's going to tell him to stay there because she won't be vice president anymore. So there's not a single person in his orbit who's going to tell him not to run. His consultants, his campaign people, they all make money off him running. There's no guarantees they'd be hired by the next guy. So that's the first thing. In his ear is going to be nothing but people telling him to run for office. They're going to have to convince all the people around him to somehow stop telling him to run for office. I don't think that will happen. Because Joe Biden has to step down. They're not going to want to infight. They're not going to want to see, Joe Biden not supporting the nominee. They don't want him to say, never mind, I don't care. They can't have that. Also, I think Joe Biden really believes that Trump will end up in jail and that he'll be fine. And the people in his ecosystem believe, no, Trump's going to jail. He'll be fine. He'll have to be campaigning from jail. And there's no way the American people will actually vote for a guy in jail. So, in order for this swap to actually happen, something that I think the media is pushing for and Democrats are pushing for, you would have to swap, I think, Joe Biden for Jill Biden. Jill Biden would have to be the only pick here. Because it gets everybody on board that would tell Joe to keep running. Of course, Jill would be there. All the people around Joe would think, okay, well, Jill will keep us on. It'll just be a continuation of Joe Biden's administration. He'll keep us going. And so it'll just be somebody who's a little more coherent. So we'll go ahead, we'll switch Joe for Jill, and we'll be fine. That's the only swap I could see working. But even when you look at it, look at their bench. Who are you going to put in? Newsom, who's running a terrible state. A lot of things to attack on there. Kamala Harris, people hate more than Joe Biden. I guess Bernie Sanders, but he's just as old. Hillary Clinton, maybe? Now, there has been talk online about Bashir, but the problem is Bashir has no national profile. You got like 3-4 months to go till election time, and there hasn't been a primary process to raise name ID of people nationwide leading into it. And so swapping Joe Biden for Bashir, as I'm seeing a lot of people mentioning on Twitter, I don't think that can happen. Bashir doesn't have the national name ID. It's going to have to be somebody who already is known nationwide. That leaves a short list. And not a super great a lot of choices. So I think if you do see Joe Biden swapped out, I think personally it will be Jill Biden, but I still am unsure they're going to be able to switch him if it's not Jill Biden for Joe Biden, because nobody's going to be telling Joe to quit. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll see you back here on Monday. I hope you have a great weekend. Till then, we'll be seeing you.